Hi, I'm Rula from Change Your Life Now. Today I want to talk about the bladder. The bladder is much more than an organ that holds the urine. It holds emotion, it holds memory, it holds fear, and it holds our ability to let go. In traditional Chinese medicine, the bladder meridian, which is a meridian that runs mostly down the back of the head, it starts here and it runs all the way down the back of the spine. It goes down to the buttocks and then back up again and then back down again, down to the legs and down to the back of your feet and ending on the little toe. It's the longest meridian in the body, and energetically it reflects on how safe we feel in the world. When we can't release stress emotionally, it often shows up in the bladder system, in a neuroenergetic kinesiology balance, in a session, for example. So let's just take a nice deep breath and listen to what I'm saying and see how this relates in your life. As we know, the bladder is a muscular organ. It stores urine that it receives from the kidneys. It's a smooth muscle, so it expands and contracts. And it's lined with an epithelium, a skin, for example, which is supplied richly by blood vessels and veins, arteries and veins. And it is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and conscious control. So your bladder is influenced by the parasympathetic system, which is the nervous system that's controlled by the vagus nerve. It's the emptying of the bladder, but also by the sympathetic nervous system, which is the storing of the bladder. The vagus nerve controls this. And the vagus nerve is the main nerve that goes down from the reptilian brain, the back of the brain, all the way down the spine, and it branches out to all your organs. And what happens when we're in stress, when we're in chronic stress, the sympathetic nervous system is affected and the parasympathetic nervous system it affects, and therefore the bladder, for example, as well as other organs, but in this case we're talking about the bladder, there's a signal that says, oh, I can't hold it, and it releases, or it holds and it holds and it holds, therefore causing infections. So as we talk about the meridian itself, it's an energy center. It's like an electric current that runs through the body. So the bladder has, in response to the fight or flight response to stress, if there's a tiger, for example, the nervous system regulates the body to say, no, it's okay, you're safe. And it controls the ability to release or the ability to hold an emotion, for example. When there is an imbalance in the bladder meridian, it causes anxiety, it causes tension in the spine, and it causes urinary issues. For example, if you're really, really scared, sometimes you wee in your pants. It's to do with your fear-based patterns and your hypervigilance, like really pay attention to what's going on when you're in a fearful situation. I want to talk about the chakra system a little bit here. So the main chakra that's connected to the bladder is the base chakra. The base chakra it's below the belly button at the base of your body, the base of your spine, and it has to do with safety and security. It has to do with your survival instinct. It has to do with your adrenal system and chronic fear. When it's unstable, when this energy field is unstable in the base chakra, you have lower back pain, for example, you have UTIs, or you can have some kind of discomfort in your lower spine, for example, the base of your spine, coccyx and stuff like that. The sacral chakra is just slightly above the base chakra, and this is involved with emotions. It's involved with creativity, intuition, your sexual energy, intimacy. Lack of intimacy, for example, will create bowel problems, lower bowel problems, and of course bladder problems as well. When the sacral chakra is blocked, it can cause UTIs, reproductive problems. It affects the uterus, the ovaries, and so on, and it can also affect male reproductive problems. Suppressed emotions is a very big thing that causes blocks in the sacral chakra and in the base chakra. And the bladder sits energetically between these two, and it literally holds emotion. It is a water element. Fear is a water element. The bladder pairs together with the kidneys, and they're both water elements, and they both relate to the emotion of fear. When you are in flow, when you are in harmony, the bladder works beautifully, the base chakra is in balance, the sacral chakra is in balance. But when you're in fear, it causes problems with these sections of your body. Panic, fear, chronic fear, all these things affect the bladder. Children, for example, who have bladder problems, bedwetting problems, or take a long time to potty train, there is an association with fear that is allowing that is causing stress in that part of the body. So often we have to look to someone who has fear, whether it comes from childhood. When we're working in kinesiology with someone, we see that there's an imbalance in the base chakra, or there's problems with the bladder, for example, we have to go back to the childhood to find out perhaps there was trauma at the time of potty training. Perhaps there was trauma at the time of, when starting, because sometimes children start wetting themselves, bedwetting, for example, and to a late age in childhood. Or when they start going to school, for example, they start wetting themselves again. So this is connected to fear and stress and anxiety. So emotionally, the bladder asks, what am I holding onto that I need to release? Obviously, as a child, the child doesn't know what it's holding onto. It probably doesn't know what it's afraid of. So this is what we uncover in kinesiology. We explore and we muscle test and we ask the body what's going on. But obviously, as an older person, we can hold a muscle and we can check with the body. But as a child, it's very difficult to get an indicator muscle for the child. So we sometimes get the parent to surrogate for the child, especially if it's a young child who is having issues with the bladder and so on. Physical conditions that one can identify that there's a problem with the bladder meridian are any UTIs, any cysts in the bladder, any overactive bladder, pelvic floor, for example, if there is a prolapsed bladder, any stones, and again, there might be stones in the kidney and it can affect the bladder. So the kidney meridian is another aspect. We're working on the bladder meridian today. And any urine retention problems that we have. So these energetic patterns often refer to long-term survival stress. So if one has had a very, very difficult traumatic life and there's issues with trauma at different stages of their lives, as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, as an older adult, long-term survival stress coming from insecurities or fear or abuse or anything like that that has kept the person in stress, this will cause imbalances in the bladder meridian. Suppressed anger masked as fear. Now that is a big one. When we have anger, so think about a bully, hurt people hurt. So when there's someone who's a bully or aggressive or angry, it's probably because there's an underlying fear that is making that person aggressive. Think of the fight or flight response. The person feels fear, feels unsafe, therefore they will fight in order to naturally get the body back into balance. Sometimes it's a matter of setting boundaries. Boundaries are not being set, therefore the person feels insecure. And also being hyper alert. So PTSD, for example, might result in bladder issues because you are on alert the whole time and you have certain behaviors that might cause an imbalance. So from a kinesiology point of view, we look at different aspects. For example, we'll look at the blood vessels, the circulation, the blood circulation. We'll look at stress in the blood circulation. We can look at the different blood vessels, veins, arteries that are involved in the bladder, and we can check if there's stress on those. We can also look at the muscles and the smooth muscle, the epithelium, the lining, the inner lining of the bladder. We can also look at the pelvic fascia, which is stored trauma. Now, what is fascia? Fascia is that outside of the muscle, the bladder muscle. So when there is chronic stress, it causes blood flow and circulation problems, less oxygen, tightening of the muscles, and the receptors, the neurotransmitters that are released from the brain, and all that sort of neurological messaging from the bladder to the brain to the brain to the bladder causes disharmony in the body. So what we can do in a balance, for example, we will look at breath, because breathing obviously calms the vagus nerve. Humming calms the vagus nerve. Gargling, the back of the throat, calms the vagus nerve. And of course, in a kinesiology balance, we might hold acupressure points. We might use tools such as sound healing, whether it's a Tibetan bowl, a crystal bowl, or tuning forks, something like that. We might use crystals. So in this balance, we look at all aspects of the bladder, whether it's structure, whether it's biological, so biochemical, whether it's neurological, working with the brain, the different parts of the brain that connect to the bladder and say, okay, I'm not working now, I can't, there's too much stress. We might look at ancestral trauma. That's a powerful one. We might look at age regression, timeline therapy, where we would go back to when we first started controlling our bladder as a young baby, that potty training time. And through hypnotherapy, for example, one doesn't remember the trauma that would have happened in that time, but the body does. The body remembers. And so again, through kinesiology, we can find out what trauma had happened, what was going on in your home. Was it your parents? Was it other siblings? What was going on that would have caused stress? And then that has a weakness in the bladder, which only shows up in your 50s and 60s, perhaps. We look at the neurovascular system, reflexes along the bladder, reflex points, holding those points, holding meridian points, working with acupressure points that are not necessarily connected to the meridian, but through the 8 extraordinary meridians, which are other meridians that interlink with the bladder meridian, where there might be toning or sedation of the energy that's in the bladder. So I hope this gives you an idea of some of the problems that one might be experiencing with the bladder and how kinesiology can help to process and to let go of something that you've been holding on to for a while. Maybe there are issues like, more serious issues with cancer, for example, or bleeding or anything like that are causing an imbalance in the bladder system. So together with your normal medical tests and your normal sort of treatments that you're having, kinesiology is a very, very good solution to help, a holistic way of healing, to help bring your body back into balance from a stress point of view. And it helps you release, my apologies for that, issues that you've been holding on to. So if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. You can put some comments below, reach out, and do some work on your healing. Thank you.